What do we mean by making business more human? Is it important? And if organisations choose to adopt this approach, what does it feel like for employees and customers? Can and should mistakes be embraced? For example, messing up the intro for a podcast the first time round and needing to do it again. I'm joined today by Katherine Wässer, who 2 years ago chose to change her career path, taking on a role that aims to change the culture of a global organisation. This sounds both awesome and intimidating in equal measures, so let's see which wins out. Welcome, Katherine, to In Good Company. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know that you've been very busy recently. How are you?
Good, thank you. Really, really happy to be here and to talk about culture and purpose.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. But before we do, I'd like to ask you our first question, which we ask all of our guests on this podcast, which is to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Oh, life in 60 seconds. Okay. I am on a continued journey of self-discovery who in her early years went through life about 100 miles an hour, saying yes to everything, grasping opportunities, constantly striving, but who has gradually learned that actually slowing down can be pretty cool, and that actually taking care of mind, body, soul is actually really important to performance and how you feel. I'm someone that was really fortunate to have my first work experience at a company that was really clear on its purpose, and the system was set up to support people and make them feel really valued. And most importantly, I had a great leader who challenged me and made me kind of better, and also gave me opportunities that I didn't expect. I got opportunities to live and work abroad, which taught me that I was stronger than I thought I was. And it taught me a lot about different cultures and different perspectives, and really how to listen. And then on the flip side of that, I've had roles where the behaviors and values and actions just didn't align with my own, and I didn't feel supported or valued. But that has also taught me an awful lot as well. And I guess finally, I believe that your outside work life is as important in shaping you. And I really make sure that I try and fill my life with what's important to me. And one of my big passions is dragon boat racing, a little bit of a random activity. But it's something that really gives me an identity outside of work. And I've learned so much about good leadership through that, and learning, and also just collective power. And it's also why my voice is just a little bit hoarse today, as we had our national championships this weekend as well.
Amazing. Yeah, it's what a great introduction, because it's really nice to hear a bit about not only kind of your early career, but also your outside of work as well. And I am curious to ask you about your dragon boat racing, which I'm going to ask you shortly. But let's jump straight into a bit more about today's episode, which is about human organizations and what we mean by that. So what do we mean by making a business more human, and why is this important?
As humans, we're all products of the experiences we've had. We're all emotional. We have thoughts, feelings, and we can just be a little bit messy sometimes. And I think traditional business models are largely transactional and often don't recognize this about humans, seeing them frequently as just really there to serve the organization, and perhaps a little bit robotic-like. Imagine, though, if we saw each individual as just that, an individual with their own strengths, passions, curiosities, and experiences. I think, and just think what we could create with that. And that's what human kind of centered is. It's seeing the human and recognizing what they can bring. And I certainly feel like working with this kind of diversity would be way more meaningful, and also a lot more fun than kind of working with robots. And it's that it creates, by being human-centered, you've got an ability to create a growth mindset instead of a fixed one, which is again what is quite traditional. And this is something that's really essential in kind of the modern world. The speed at which the world is moving and kind of changing. Businesses can't afford to stand still, and you can't afford to have people with kind of fixed mindsets. You've got to have a dynamic and adaptive kind of human-centered workforce if you're really going to survive and achieve in modern day.
So I'm going to ask you a bit of a challenging question perhaps then, because you mentioned about your outside of work and your passion for dragon boat racing. And I'm curious, because you've written an article about this, which I was interested about. And at the end of that article, you talked about getting valuable experience from being out of your comfort zone. So I'm wondering how have you linked your experiences with dragon boat racing and you're working in a human organization? How have you kind of brought those two together?
So I think I probably need to talk about how I ended up dragon boating. So I spent 3 years really struggling at work. I was in a role where my values weren't aligned to the organization, and I kept striving and thinking, well, if I just keep behaving the way that I've always behaved, it'll be okay. But it kind of wasn't. And it really took a lot of my energy. And I got to a point where I'd pretty much burnt out. And it was at that point that I said, this isn't okay. And for the first time in my career, I actually said, I need to kind of pull back. And I thought I need to pull back, and I need something in my life that I have to commit to. So it wasn't about just going to the gym or going and seeing friends. It was like I wanted something that would mean that I would have to leave work on time, that I would have to go and be a part of. And it was just one of those random situations where there was a work email that went out and they were doing some practice sessions for Dragon Boat locally to where I lived. And I thought, you know what have I got to lose? Like, sounds fun. I do love exercise and sport. So I said, I'm going to give it a try. And there was something about it. There was just a real sense of community. And I think it kind of matched who I am. I do like to strive. I like to, the perfectionist thing, as so many people have. It was like I wanted to kind of achieve. And so, but it also gave me a community. So it ticked kind of a lot of boxes for me. And it did become this commitment that I had. And I realized that as I kind of grew and I did more and more about it, and I started to learn these skills about, it's such an inclusive sport. It attracts all types of people, old, young. I mean, one of the best teams in our league, it's full of like 60 plus year olds, and they're phenomenal because of the teamwork and how long they've trained together. But it is a really accepting sport. And we had phenomenal coaches who were just so supportive. They weren't at the front of the boat shouting at us to do this and do that. They were supporting, they were helping, they were showing us, they were giving us video feedback constantly. And so it reminded me, after a period of feeling like I didn't have that support and a feeling of not feeling good enough, all of a sudden I found this opportunity outside of work to feel good enough, to strive, and, to have that sense of community. So that reminded me what it was like, which was so important for work, and the work that I was then had the privilege to start doing about a year or so kind of after that. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what it's meant to me. I'm not sure.
Well, it's so that resonates so much. The way you've talked about that. I think what was amazing with that is that you've kind of acknowledged that you needed something to change, and that you took it upon yourself to make that change happen, and then discovered this. I mean, had you heard of dragon boat racing before? Like, how did you land on dragon boat racing? You mentioned an email, didn't you?
It was an email, and interestingly, I remember being on a family holiday up in Scotland, I think many, many years ago, and actually I remembered seeing one then, and then, it was just this work email, and honestly, the first training session was hideous. It was hailing. I couldn't feel my fingers. It was truly awful. Like, how I went back, I do not know, but it was how people made me feel. It was how people made me feel. And I was so, at that point in my life, I felt really deprived of care and support. And so that just meant kind of everything for me. And just as I say, the whole values of the support of the sport around kind of inclusivity and how technical it is. It is so about teamwork. We have a saying in our boat, there's no passenger in a Seclo boat, because every single person in that boat is essential to getting us across the line. And that is the kind of thing that, you know, you have to do in business as well. You know, no one person can do everything. You know, we're not superhuman. And so that kind of ethos is just super important.
And that analogy then does work well for the work that you do, because I remember when you talked, we met at Impact's event that we hosted at the Shard earlier this year, and you were a panelist there and spoke about, and it was all, the whole session was around creating human-centered organizations. So as far as I understand it, you're currently the head of purpose and culture transformation at Jaguar Land Rover. And so purpose, which we've already spoken about, is very important in what you do. Can you tell us a bit more about JLR's purpose and how easy, or maybe not easy, is it to align people within the organization with the purpose?
Yeah, so our purpose was created with our people. That was really important for us. We knew that it couldn't be something that was created in the boardroom, because we'd been a really traditional organization, very hierarchical, very push as opposed to pull. And so we knew that this needed to really live and breathe in the organization and be believed. And so it was important that it was co-created with our people. And what our purpose does is it represents what's really great about us, but it also perhaps represents, you know, what we've not been so great at and tries to make us better. And, you know, at the heart, it is really about trying to put our people back at the heart of the organisation, something that, you know, we'd perhaps neglected. And it also has ambitions and aspirations to make our business more than just the products and experiences that we create, but one which also has a positive impact on the communities and world around us. So it's not actually just a purpose either. So we actually have it's a purpose framework, we call it. So we have a kind of purpose on the top, which is live the exceptional with soul, which is all about driving kind of excellence, pushing boundaries, being of great quality, but doing that with care for people, planet, and profit. And then we have our mobilizing change or vision idea. It's what do we need to change here and now? And that's about being proud creators of modern luxury. And that's really about empowering everybody in our organization to be a creator. Because again, it's not just about one person. We're a hugely diverse organization with lots of different skills, experiences, jobs. And so we really wanted to make sure that everybody felt part of it. And it wasn't just the designers and the engineers that were creating cars. It's actually every kind of single one of us. And modern luxury is the huge transition that we're trying to make as an organization. And then all of that is kind of underpinned by our creators code, which is all about how we do what we do. And every single layer kind of talks to each other as well. But it really is about trying to create that kind of North Star for the organization. So everything we do should really be kind of in service of that. And I think as it came from our people, it has created a resonance, which I think has certainly helped people to align to it. But it is, as you say, it's a huge job. We're an organization of about 40 odd thousand people across the world. And so that's really challenging to create awareness of something, but then B, to actually create an emotional connection, which is ultimately what you need if you're going to create action. And so we spent a lot of time working with our leadership so that they can be confident in leading the change. And we've also been lighting lots of fires across the organisation because really it's a collective effort. Just like in a dragon boat, it's a collective effort which requires a lot of consistency, a lot of repetition, a lot of celebration, and a lot of feedback and change.
For sure. And you mentioned there about being 40,000 people-ish across the world. I would imagine that getting that kind of purpose and aligning everybody to it, there must have either been or are being some kind of blockers. What blockers have maybe you encountered that you can talk about, and what advice would you give any other organizations that might be going through a similar sort of purpose strategy change that you could give? What advice could you give to kind of help other people through it?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely learned a lot, and there's definitely been kind of various challenges along the way. But I think two things kind of come to mind, and one is change. People often don't like change, although interestingly, humans also need change to keep them kind of interested. But I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable with it, and there's also a lot of people who may have got a long way in their careers by perhaps not being so human-centered. And so you can meet resistance. You can also meet a lot of skepticism, because change just feels like a constant these days. So what you come up against is a lot of people going, I've seen this before, what's different this time? So that can be kind of quite challenging. It also requires a lot more effort to be kind of human-centered, which some people might just not be willing to give, particularly if they're not that engaged with your organization. So it's really in these moments about showing that there is another way for them and the people they lead. And it's also about getting enough traction in the organization so that it means that to not be human-centered or to align becomes actually unacceptable. And then I think the second thing is kind of VUCA. So, the whole volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. This has the potential to put a lot of tension in the system. And I think when we kind of face into that, it can be really easy to forget the human. And actually just become really transactional, because it is quicker to tell somebody what to do than to go, can I help you with that? Could we think about this? How do we do that? You go into that automatic mode. So what you can see is a kind of tripping back into old behaviors. And so what's important there is just self-awareness is hugely important. So, key that organizations create the time and space for people to kind of build this muscle memory and build these skills so that they can recognize when they might start to kind of slip back, and to be able to be vulnerable in these moments and say, I'm not okay, or do you know what, the reason that I just acted like that is because of X, Y, and Z, and ask for help if you need to, because with that openness, what you will get is a better response from people, and then you can keep the kind of human-centeredness kind of going rather than reverting back. Which is always, that's the thing that we've been kind of most worried about, and it's the thing that we hear the most about is that fear of when things get really tough, can we still keep doing it? But those are the moments where things like a purpose and your behaviors become the most important thing.
Absolutely. What you said there about the importance of connecting in with people in the organization, and that the importance essentially of conversation. That was something I remember that you mentioned at the Shard event. It was kind of crucial to kind of make any sort of change initiative successful, is that constant communication and dialogue, to kind of see it through. And so looking with that also in mind, we talked about culture transformation and global organization. So you're more or less 2 years into this role now. What are some of the other things that you would have maybe learned during this role, and what advice would you be giving to anybody looking to work on their culture in their organization?
Oh, great question. So it's been a really steep learning curve, I think. As an organization, we've never done anything like this, and neither had I. I am though really proud of what we've achieved, and actually what is a really short space of time. So we're about 2 years into, as I said, what we think is a kind of 10-year journey. And there has certainly been some key things, I think, that have enabled us to be as successful as we've kind of so far been. And so some of the things that I would think about is being really clear on why you want to change and have a narrative on that. For us, it was recognizing that the culture and behaviors that had been created were not actually conducive to delivering the ambitious strategy that we'd kind of set out. So our people weren't, they weren't in that growth mindset and dynamic and kind of adaptive. But also, we had people that wouldn't recommend us as a place to work, which didn't feel okay. And so there was a real reason why we needed to change. Having exec leadership support is absolutely fundamental. Our organization had tried some of this before, but if you don't have the right exec support, and it's probably not going to work, because much as the fires will start below them, they have to show up and they have to support and they have to believe in what you're doing. We have such phenomenal support from our CEO, and he talks so passionately about why this is so important to him. And so that just sends out a really positive message to people. And then inspire your leadership as well. So yes, the senior team is, the exec team is up there, but they've got a whole load of leaders, and you need to inspire them, because again, people are going to be looking up. They are going to be looking to them to be role modeling the change. And if they're not, then you're not going to create as much desire from other people. People have to, believe in it. And so that's another thing, is you've got to create moments of belief, because actions will always speak louder than words, and people want to see that you're aligning your actions with what you say. And this was something that we heard so much, because as I said, we have done similar things before, but they've never really stuck the way that this has. And a lot of that was because basically what we would do is we'd create something, put it in the business, you'd talk about it for a week, and then you'd never talk about it again. And it just became words on the wall that people walked past. You've really got to show people what it means. And we often refer to them as like beacon actions. So what are those really big things that we're doing to align our actions with what we say we want to be? You then need to create accountability in everyone, because this isn't just the role of leaders and your exec team. This is the role of everybody. We are all responsible for the culture that we create. So it's finding ways to really drive awareness and understanding and that emotional connection, because if I feel something, then I'm going to be so much more likely to act. And if I can understand that, then I can start to define, well, what is my individual contribution to this? And we do that. We have a purpose ambassador program. So we've upskilled our own people to run facilitated conversations with people. So we specifically create time and space for people to go and have a conversation about the purpose framework, so that they can create their own connection. We don't tell them what to think. We don't tell them what it means, but it's like, how do you feel about it? What do you understand? And it's not about telling people what to think or defending what we've created. It's about, letting people make their own decision and listen to other people and sense make collectively and kind of understand how they want to contribute. Couple more things. It's the list is endless here. I think it's another one around like just talking consistently. This isn't something that should sit on the side. It's something that is really integral to your business performance. So it's not a culture and purpose. It's not something that just sits in a people area. It has got to be owned by the whole organization. If it's truly going to stick and embed, does really have to be owned by kind of everything. And as I've said, this is hard. This work is hard. Being human-centered is hard. It's emotional. And if you ask a question to somebody, you have to be prepared to listen. And everybody will be on their own journey. Not everybody's moving at the same pace, because they've all had different experiences. They've all had different amounts of time. So it won't be a smooth journey. There'll be ups and downs and sideways and all things. But you do have to create the space and the time and give it that kind of patience. And then finally, have fun. Culture is made up of interactions that we have with each other. And so make them fun. That's certainly something we try and do. We've organised a lot of events that create space for people just to come together and connect. And that is really, really important. You want your interactions to be fun. You spend every day at work. We don't always get it right. But, there's definitely, I would say, in our organisation, a much lighter feeling to it than there was a couple of years ago.
And so there's a couple of things I wanted to reflect on there. So I really liked what you said about, and I think that's a really nice idea about the ambassador program, having a particular set of people that they themselves can create that own sphere of influence to have repercussions throughout the rest of the business to help send that message across and get everybody aligned to the purpose framework. I think that was really nice. And what one question I had around that is that have there been any particular like pivotal moments of where there was like a big challenge, it was hard to kind of get it off the ground or anything like that? And one thing that was there anything like that along the way, or has there, does it feel like there's been any pivotal moments at all?
Gosh, I think there's probably been quite a few. I would say, but we've also been very fortunate. I think we've had a really good run. But that is down to the fact that we've had so much support. And I guess there was a moment where we all got a little bit nervous, I would say, so it took us 9 months to actually create the purpose framework. And then we launched it initially with our top leaders because we really wanted them to understand it first and to really get it. And probably about a couple of months, I always forget my timelines. It's probably been longer. I'm just going to say a period afterwards. But actually, do you know what? It's probably a year after we did that.
Right.
Our CEO, who'd been so pivotal in us creating our purpose framework, he actually decided to step down from the organisation. And that was a real moment where we went, he's been our kind of biggest supporter, or one of our biggest supporters, let's just say. And we wondered, is it going to be okay? Now, I think the timing was actually really kind of good in some ways, because actually by that point, I think we'd managed to get enough momentum that actually it was bigger than him and it was bigger than the board. And we'd engaged enough leadership to enable it to continue. And also we were incredibly fortunate in that who stepped in to those shoes was somebody that had been on the journey with us and who is an incredibly passionate person about people as well. And so what that meant is that we didn't get a break. There was no questioning. There was no going backwards. Actually, he very clearly came on and said, this continues. This work is really important to our business, to our performance, to who we are. And so actually, we've just kind of continued pretty smoothly, which is incredibly lucky, because those are the moments that you worry about when you have a change of leader. Often leaders like to come in and they'll want to stamp their own mark on, or they'll want to do things again. But thankfully that kind of didn't happen. And continues to show a huge amount of support for us in the work that we do.
Oh, that's really helpful and amazing and necessary to kind of make sure that the work that you're doing is successful and it actually ends up working, because ultimately it's going to benefit the business overall, isn't it? So it's important that those people get aligned to you as much as anything else. I wanted to talk about the Shard again. And one of the things that you talked about was the importance of creating an emotional connection. And we've kind of briefly talked about a little bit about this already, and kind of enabling that high impact, high learning space that can enable growth. So how, if you were to kind of give some advice to other leaders, how can leaders create their own environments that inspire people? How have you found that what do you think helps to help inspire people along their way?
So I don't think it is just about the leaders. I do think it's about the whole system, but the leader's role is certainly critical to unleashing potential. And I think if I kind of reflect on my own personal experience and reflect on those moments when I have really felt like I've achieved my potential, I think there's been some key things that have been in place. I have, in those moments, I have believed in the purpose of the organization that I've been working for, and the work that I've been doing has felt meaningful. I think that's really important. My leader has cared about who I am as a person. They've asked me about what motivates me, what drives me, asked me what I need, and they've supported me in finding opportunities that have enabled me to, share my strengths and experience. They've challenged me. They've asked me questions. They've given me feedback that have made me think differently and be better. I absolutely love that process of getting to a solution, and it can feel deeply uncomfortable sometimes. I've had bosses where you can feel like you're going like this because your opinions and your perspectives are so different. But that's what dialogue is about. It's not about agreeing. In fact, if you're agreeing, you're probably not talking about everything that there is to talk about, or all the opportunity that there is. And so, that's part of the process, and it really should be embraced. And obviously, you need to understand your people, because you need to understand, well, how does that individual work? Some people it might not work. Some people may need you just to write it down and give them time to reflect. Some people, like me, will want you to, create the right environment and the space to give the feedback, but actually enjoy that kind of face-to-face feedback. It is about understanding how your people kind of work. That's important, though, the giving space. I've always been, leaders have given me space. They've perhaps set the boundaries, but they've enabled me to be curious and to go away and to create something and to think for myself. They've not told me the answer, and I think that's really important. They've supported me. They've really pushed me into situations that have perhaps felt wildly uncomfortable and I felt massively unprepared for. But they've ultimately trusted me. And they've been right behind me in those moments to catch me if I fall. They've been there. And then I think most importantly, they've celebrated me, the wins and the achievements. And so I think those are kind of, as I say, if I reflect on when have I been at my best, those are the things that have been present. And I think those are the things that are important. It's not rocket science. It's just seeing people as people and not as a transactional kind of asset that just do a thing because you tell them to do a thing.
Yeah, I really, again, connect with what you said there about kind of that space. I think is a key one I took away from that, is that space and the opportunity to kind of reflect on. I think that's so critical in any line of work, really, to get to be really successful. So I really resonated with what you said there. And also I wanted to kind of take a moment to appreciate kind of how open and honest you've kind of been through this. And also I noticed, again, in research for this episode, you take the same approach on your LinkedIn profile as well, kind of this openness and honesty. And again, I think that there should be space for that within organizations. One of the things that kind of I picked up on was that in one of your posts, you mentioned about where you've kind of got to in your career. You've kind of got here through good and bad work experiences, and they've played a major part in getting into the role and through your career that you have. That kind of everyone makes mistakes is a very human trait, or if you can call them mistakes, often they get reframed as opportunities, which I think is quite nice. How do you think, or what's your opinion on approaching those approaching those mistakes, and let's, for the sake of a better word, call them failures maybe. What do you think organizations' approach to that should be, and what can we learn from?
Yeah, I just want to cycle back and just say thank you for that that comment around the authenticity, because I do think that's kind of really, really important. And I think if I reflect on my career, I once got some feedback where where an old manager told me that I was too emotional. And I remember at the time being really wounded by that, because I thought it's because I'm emotional and I'm passionate that people do that work with me and want to collaborate with me. And it has taken me years to actually realize that it's okay to be emotional and passionate. It's super important, but it's about how you manage that. And if you can manage that, then you can have a far bigger impact. But it is really, again, I didn't really show my full self. I was showing this passion and emotion, but I wasn't actually really, I don't think, being my true kind of self. And that's something that kind of I spent a lot of time reflecting, counseling, all of that kind of stuff to try and work out why I am who I am, and what, you know, what it is that kind of drives me, which is why I said at the start, I'm on this continued journey of kind of self-discovery. But that's something that's really important to me, is that what you see is kind of what you get. So I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. I know how that feels, for sure. And I think it's like you're right, managing it, but also harnessing it. I thought it was a nice term. Yeah, because you, like you say, it's super important to be passionate about what you do. Because if you don't, I mean, it shows. But yeah, it's finding yourself not getting so passionate and so worked about it. And I guess you've experienced this yourself with that burnout, because that's where it can ultimately lead to, can't it? And that doesn't help anyone. So yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there.
Sorry, I'll go back to the question now. So question of failure. So I think my personal view is that I personally think it's better to talk about courage and bravery. And I think it's about changing the language and the mindset, because when you say failure, you're automatically creating a negative emotion in people. And if I remember when I was 7 or 8 and I failed my bronze swimming badge, and the shame and the guilt that created was something that actually lived with me for quite a long time, and actually probably didn't serve me very well. But if I look back at some of my later, what you might class as failures, at the root of all of those moments was always courage to do something different, or that I'd never done before. And at kind of 8 years old, there was courage to try. And actually, I was ahead of my swimming class at the time, and I knew this, and I just let the nerves get the better of me, because I hadn't done it again, and the fear kind of took hold. But I loved swimming. I was supported, and I did it again, and went on to do competitive swimming for kind of years. But I think fear can stop you doing things, but courage really makes us do things that we didn't think we could do. And sometimes we don't do it, but being motivated by courage will mean you do it again and again. And so I do think there's something about the language actually that might help us with some of that. But one thing I will say, and this goes back to that kind of last conversation we were having, is that organizations need to create space for innovation and curiosity. You cannot do it in 30 minutes between millions of other kind of meetings in a day. I mean, we were just talking about it before we even started this podcast about, like how busy kind of days can be. To get into the mindset for innovation, you need to have space, you need to be present, you need to be ready to get into the process, which can be difficult, because it is a process, a bit like I was talking about a minute ago with the dialogue. There's a brainstorming process, there's a testing, there's a trying, there's a failing, there's a learning, there's a going again. And I think this is probably where a lot of organizations are struggling, is that they're not creating enough space and time to do it. And equally, as humans, we are so overloaded, not just in our day-to-day work, but just by everything that's happening outside. We often have conversations with our leadership, with our people, and they have so much going on outside of work. And you think, how are you even showing up today? With so much going on. And with all of that, if you don't create the space and time, then it's not surprising, or it's not surprising that you won't get a lot of innovation. There's an environment that has to be created for that to be kind of possible.
Yeah, I really like what you said there about like reframing even the term failure. And I think we kind of, sort of prefaced the question really with, because I agree, I think that the word failure is, that language is kind of important to acknowledge, and where if organizations can turn or reframe even the term failure to learning opportunities, even just that slight change can make a huge
on a
difference.
Different path.
Yeah, and as you say, what that does is it enables their people to be more courageous, to take potentially more but calculated risks. And if it doesn't work, okay, well, that's fine. We know now that didn't work, and we can try something else. And ultimately, I think that element is what makes humans, isn't it? It's that kind of that learning through there. And it might be slower than a computer, but hey, that's fine. We've reached our last question of the podcast. I'm almost sorry to say, I am sorry to say, and which is the same question we've asked all of our guests, again, a bit like the first question, which is, if you were starting your career again, starting over, what would be the best piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Okay, so
It's a big one.
The best, so not just on this project, but in life again.
Sorry, I was thinking like if at the beginning of your career, so starting the whole thing again, not just the project.
Not just the project. Okay. It's funny because actually I don't think I've got regrets about any of my career. I think you make your own opportunities. Nothing is ever going to be handed to you on a platter. You have to make your own opportunities. And I think I have been incredibly fortunate. I've had some really, as I say, incredible opportunities in my career and worked for some really fantastic people. And I have also had those moments that, haven't been so great. And, I wish perhaps they hadn't lasted as long as they perhaps did. But everything that I've been through and everything that I've learned has made me into the person that I am today. So to give myself advice and go, do you know what? 20 years ago, you probably should have slowed down. You probably should have looked after yourself, maybe slept a little bit more. I might have missed some of those opportunities that have actually made me the person that I've become. So I think what I would say, though, is appreciate the journey, because I think you're so often in a rush to get to the next thing or to get to the end point. But actually, there are probably moments where I wish I'd perhaps just been a little bit more present and just enjoyed it for that moment that it kind of was.
Well, you may be interested to know that is very, very similar to another response. So you're not alone in that kind of reflecting on the now and going, do you know what? Actually, yeah, okay, some bits were rocky and a bit rocky, but ultimately they led to that they made you become the person that you are now. So yeah, that's
and I don't think I could have been, if I hadn't have gone through some of that stuff, I don't think I would be as passionate about the work that I now do. And I don't think I could lead it as authentically as I do if I hadn't have had some of those kind of experiences.
Yeah,
it's like every emotion agree. It's like I don't agree with the concept of positive and negative emotions. Like every emotion is there to tell you something, and so they're all equally important in shaping who you become.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that just leaves me to finish today's episode by thanking Katherine so much for joining me. It's been an amazing conversation, and I feel like I, even myself, have just taken so much from it. So thank you, Katherine. Wässer, for joining me again today. Really appreciate it. And if you would like to find out any more about either Impact or Jaguar Land Rover, or you'd like to connect with either myself or Catherine on LinkedIn, or maybe you'd just like to find out about dragon boat racing, then,
we're always looking for new members.
Yeah,
always.
I'm sure. Then you can find all of those links, maybe not one about dragon boat racing, but you'll find all the links that you need in the description of this episode. So that just leaves me to say thank you ever so much for joining us today. And until the next time, take care.